Hello, folks. Eshan LaCoste here in another segment of All Wise Transformation, where we talk about mental health, spiritual practice, and self-care. And today's sort of like Juno and I first show together.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
Yeah, because we got done with the module, and now we're up and running.
Yeah, it's super exciting. And we're talking about one of my favorite things today, which is like archetypes and the way that we perceive reality.
So true, so true. So usually how we start off question, what is the most uncomfortable clothes that you ever wore but you kept on due to because you were at a party or at an event? What's the most uncomfortable clothes, article clothes that you kept on at an event you're like, I'm never wearing this clothes again?
I was 20, like 22 at the time, maybe, or maybe even younger, maybe like 20. And I was working at Bath and Body Works at the time. And that year for Halloween, I was Tinkerbell, but I was like an S&M Tinkerbell. And I was wearing shoes that were a size too small for me, like a full size too small for me. And by the end of the night, my big toenail fell off and my shoe filled with blood, but I looked great. So,
Wow.
yeah. I was like, whatever, it's worth it. I still have both my toenails, so I mean, I still have my like nothing's permanent. So,
Yeah.
what about you?
I would have to say I used to do track and field, and I did the hurdles, and I had a jock strap on, and let me tell you, it was just not comfortable whatsoever. And ever since then, it was like a one-time thing that I had a jock strap, and I've always been freeballing.
Excuse me. Admittedly, sometimes I like to wear jock straps, but they're more for like fashion than function, you know?
Fair.
Yeah.
Aw, man. So, Juno, how have you been?
I've been really very well. Thank you for asking. I am super excited about some things I have coming up with the House of H. We have Witch School coming up, and actually, Eshin is part of the class that is auditing it. He is part of the very foundational bricks in the house class. Eshin is auditing and helping me build it. We have a fabulous array of students who I trust very, very implicitly. And I'm super thankful for it. So that's actually going to be people will be able to enroll in Witch School in 8 weeks, so 2 months, and
I
super
thought
excited about
I
the whole
thought I,
process.
but I did enroll. Didn't I enroll, or did I register? Or was it me registering? Was that what it was?
No, but you're auditing, so you
Oh,
don't.
yeah.
Yeah, like people who are purchasing into it will be able to participate in like 2 months.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah,
Got it. I'm excited.
me too. I'm very excited for it. And in addition to that, what else did I have going on that was just recently? Yeah, I'm also going to be on another. I'm guesting on some pop culture podcast that they asked me to be like a regular guest on, but I don't even know the name of it yet. I just like I don't want to say I auditioned for it, but like I kind of fell into a conversation with this guy and he was like, I need you on my show. And I was like, okay. It's like, that works for me, sure.
Do you know what kind of show it is or a podcast?
Yeah, it's all about like pop culture and like what's happening in that realm and stuff. And it was really funny because some of the stuff they were asking me, I think they just like talking to me, and they were like, "I can make this work," because they were like, "What do you think about like Puff Daddy?" And I was like, "I think that's a mess. That's what I think, quite honestly." And then he asked me another question about another pop culture like moment that's happening right now, and I was like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." It's like so. It's like the only reason I know anything about like what's happening with Puff Daddy is because my mom tells me because she like gets like hung up on like things
The
in media.
she gets
Yeah. My mom loves the drama.
media drama.
Yeah.
I'm sort of unplugged from all that stuff.
Me too. So it's kind of nice because I'll be able to like experience pop culture without needing to like dive into pop culture. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Sounds fun.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. When I know more about like what it's like and what it's called, I'll talk about it, but I don't even know what that's called. Also, I forgot. We are starting to look for sponsors for the House of H's first annual fundraiser, which will be happening not this October, but next October. And it's going to be a giant masquerade ball with a murder mystery and like a casino night type of theme feel. And there's going to be like a silent auction and a midnight carnival. It's going to be so much fun. So I'm super excited for that. That we've started to get the ball rolling on that.
Ooh, a tentative date or season this may happen?
It'll be the first Saturday in of 2026.
Saturday, okay.
Yeah. And right now it's scheduled to be at a castle in New Jersey.
Jersey has castles?
Yeah, I know. I was surprised too. It does. It's called the Legacy Castle.
Okay, I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
More so that Jersey has a castle. Like I would be like, oh, Maine has a castle,
That makes sense to me.
or like Rhode Island has a castle, right?
Rhode
Like,
Island does have a castle. I've been there.
oh, you have, yeah.
Yeah.
And then like out, out west, like the Bay Area, there's some castle like
I
structure.
mean, what's wrong with Jersey that you think it doesn't deserve castles? You're like every state except for New Jersey, I could see a castle in. But that trash bag, absolutely not.
Uh,
Why do you hate New Jersey, Eshin?
I I don't hate Jersey. Jersey is always
I
it's
mean, you
changing my
certainly don't love it.
changing my perspective. It's always changing my perspective. Jersey does.
That's fair. That's fair.
So today we're talking about the collective unconscious.
Yes.
Specifically from, I think Carl Jung is sort of the author of this idea that there is this human experience that we all have access to, or various ways of interacting in archetypes, right?
Yeah. And there's a lot of overlap with how archetypes show up in our daily existence. And also, kind of, I think archetypes are a wonderful overlap for the the psychological understanding of like how we participate in this world, but also the metaphysical understanding of how we participate in this world. And I think there's this really nice like Venn diagram moment in the middle that like if you sit in, you can kind of see both of them through a new lens.
One of the things I really enjoyed learning was that archetypes also have access or connection to ancestors, which is one of the words that really stood out to me, which is interesting because like I think when I originally thought of or think about the collective unconscious, I really think of it this sort of spiritual sense. But I think Carl also really talks about it. I'm calling by his first name, Carl.
I just picked that up too. I was like, I love that. They're on a first name basis. That's beautiful. You know, Carl, he's kind of crazy, wild in bed.
Oh my god, he's so mystical and woo woo.
That's why I love him.
But there's sort of like this biological component, right? Like in the sense that we have access to knowledge and access to memories and sort of just human experience in general, which I think is a very innovative thought for its time.
Yeah. Yeah, and absolutely for like the time at which Jung was doing his work, which I think was like in the 1800s. Is that correct?
Yep, yep.
Yeah. I find that really, really fascinating because the world wasn't lending itself to that conversation at the time. And so the fact that somebody who is as intelligent and well versed as he was able to like not only present that to the world, but present it to the world in a way that it has sustained and is still a really relative part of the way we understand psychology today.
Yeah, yeah.
Shout out to the publication Psychology Today. If you want to sponsor us, let us know.
So, how did you get into Carl Jung? Like, what's the thing that's like, oh yeah, that really speaks to me? Because I'm aware of like there's the mystical side of him, and the thing that really drew me is the shadow, like the work around the shadow, the work of trying to sort of figure out these parts of ourselves we don't accept. And so I'm curious, like, what drew you to Carl?
I think what drew me to him was a mixture of things. I think first and foremost, I've always interacted with tarot in some capacity, and there's just a huge overlap because tarot is basically a deck of archetypes. You know what I mean? Like it's basically um the way that tarot explains things is through like symbolism and synchronicities and stuff like that, which is like a huge part of how Jung interprets the world. And then when I was getting my master's degree in social work, we had to, at one point during, I don't know if it wasn't research, it was another class, we talked about like kind of the people that influenced how we understand the mind today. And we covered several perspectives, but one of them being Freud and one of them being Jung. And I remember because they had that whole like tete-a-tete back and forth where they were working together, then they weren't. So I found that kind of fascinating. And then when I actually started to study Jung in at Rutgers, we I was like, this is wild because it was like grounding a lot of the woo-woo stuff that I do in something scientific. And actually, that's kind of the thing that inspired me around having the desire to show people in a way or like bring the idea to people that religions and spiritualities are really kind of a social science.
Hmm.
And like I know that like sometimes I get flack when I say things like that, but I'm like ultimately like we don't know what's on the other side of the veil. We can make assumptions and we can have experiences that bring us really close to understanding it, but there's no saying actually what happens when we leave. Unless you're like going into like hypnosis and you want to talk about activating and accessing the subconscious through that route, in which case then that's actually a really interesting overlap because you could talk about like how in hypnotic states of like alpha and theta, you actually get to a truer way of communicating with the unconscious. And Dolores Cannon actually did a lot of work with that. I think it's theta is generally where please, if someone's out there listening to this, correct me because like I've only loosely studied QHHT, which is the quantum healing hypnosis technique that Dolores Cannon found, like created. So I just started with that, so I don't have the full information on that, but I believe most hypnotic states take place in theta, but Dolores Cannon's technique takes place in alpha, which is why you can kind of, or at least the way she explained it, is why you can access the unconscious through that state. So you could actually like kind of I don't know, there's just so much overlap with Jung and like the mystical stuff.
Yeah.
And like the mystical stuff is always what gets me off or like gets me like so intrigued and like going. So that's why I attached to him because I just love the overlap.
Yeah. So he breaks down sort of the key components of the collective unconscious, and one of the things that he talks about is the universal and inherited. So it's like this personal unconscious which arises from the individual unique experience, and the collective unconscious is believed to be inherent and common in all humans, which I find very very fascinating in that sense of that we all have this innate connection to each other that's just unknown and also known at the same time.
I think that he refers to that as individuation, which is where you kind of process and integrate the unconscious parts of the self into the conscious awareness. So that's like stuff like shadow work, and it's the act of becoming whole. And on the flip side of that, you have like the hero's journey, which is what tarot talks about, like the fool's journey, which is like the hero is like in this case the hero being the fool. So I think that again, there's that parallel that I'm like, well, what, like how is that? That's like wild.
Yeah, so is that, and I think that's where it also talks about, like, storehouse of specific memories, which that part I guess I don't really understand that part when it's sort of speaking about the details of personal memories passed on. And so sometimes I think maybe there's like, I know for females, right, like ovary wise or eggs, like that's the same one that they had when they were in their mom, and also some of the same ones when they were in their grandmother's rooms, and I'm probably like butchering the sort of concept of that. So
You're talking about the mitochondrial DNA and
yeah,
how it's passed down.
yeah, I think that's what it is, right? And so it's like there is sort of this biological component, which I feel like Jung is sort of really putting in very sort of clinical terms in that sort of memory or storehouse of memory that we have access to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you talk about like the storehouse of like the archetypes and stuff like that, or how I miss how I don't want to misquote you, but like I think that that's kind of like all of those things that we can agree on as like a trope or as a type without necessarily needing to get into the nitty gritty of explaining it. Like a king is always a king, a fool is always a fool, a magician is always a magician, like that type of thing, like these like large concepts that like I'm sure if Carl Jung were to be here today, the process of how to determine an archetype would be the same, but I think there would be a lot more archetypes than his first conception of it because I think the world has become so much more nuanced. And actually, Carolyn Mace, I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's a mystic and medical intuitive. She's
Oh.
originally from Chicago. Are you familiar with her at all?
No, I'm not.
Great. She's an author. I like her earlier stuff. She's a little bit older now, and I don't know if she's fully together anymore. I'm sorry if you're listening, Carolyn, but I've heard mixed things. But she does a lot of work with archetypes too, and I don't know if I even have her. I don't have her deck accessible to me immediately, but she released a whole deck of archetypes around the concept of healing and like the fact that there are like in addition to there being say everyone has the saboteur, the prostitute, the child, and there was one more that I can't remember. And then like, from those four archetypes, they kind of splinter out into different things and like a web of interconnection.
Do you think for that storehouse of like memories, do you feel like for some individuals, depending on the situation that they're in, depending on their susceptibility to sort of energies and experience, that's what past lives are? Like there's these moments where where we remember things that may not have happened in our current iteration of life. I'm just curious. Do you think there's a connection there, or is that completely way off?
So I've been playing with past lives lately, like in my head and how that works, because more and more as I go into like mystical workings and mysticism and all of that, I kind of think about the fact that I think time is happening all at once. I don't think that the past, the present, and the future are separate at all. I think it's all in the same moment. And so when I think about that, I kind of think our past lives just other aspects of ourself that maybe are like turned up on the volume for a moment so we become like super sensitive to it and that's when we become aware of it. But also I think like the more we dive into like I also believe that we are all one thing. We are all one divine dancing organism. Like there is nothing that changes me from you, from the microphone, from the computer. Like it's all one thing. And so I think like if everything's all one thing and everything is also always happening all at once, it's kind of like we're just remembering different perspectives of the story at different times.
So it's like if you're sort of standing north, you're sort of seeing the perspective from that angle. And then if you sort of switch, you're facing, like east, right? Then you're sort of seeing the story from that perspective. But no matter where you are, you're sort of like still at that point, right? And so everything
Yes.
is sort of happening at that point, but it's sort of like a rotation where depending on where you are at that point, you're sort of seeing things a little bit differently, right?
Yeah.
At least that's how I'm understanding it.
That's more or less what I mean. And I also think that like we are all I mean, this part is actually science where like we are all vibrating at different frequencies and different like speeds and stuff like that. So I think when it comes to like a future or like a past or a future moment that we're thinking about, in order to access that, we have to match our frequency to it. So,
Hmm.
like, whether that be staying in a constant thought process that makes that possible, or because, like, if you're following like Hermeticism or those like old axioms of how like the world was created, where attention goes, energy flows where attention goes. So the more, or like the as above, so below, as without, so within, those like types of phraseologies, it suggests that like it's all just a game of it's all a mind game. And
Hmm.
I think like you can see that through like how cognitive behavioral therapy works, right? Like we have a negative pattern that pops up and then we're like, well, how does this negative pattern make me feel? And then like how can we replace this feeling with a different activity or a different how can we replace it somehow and like reprogram that belief? So, I mean, CBT is I very recognized as a technique that works for many people. And I think that all CBT is, in a way, is intention. So, like, if we can agree that that form of intention has impact, why then would other forms of like manifestation and intention work not have impact?
Yeah. Oof, you just laid it on.
Dismantling reality one word at a time.
Yeah, and so I have nothing for that because you just laid it. So archetypes as a construct. So I think you pointed out some of those, right? Sort of like the like fairy tales, right? In the sense of a wise man and wait, hold on. Is that the one I have? So there's like the universal criminal. I don't get that part. What do you think they're trying to say in that section?
Which section?
The archetype as its concept. It's
Yeah, the third bullet.
yeah.
It's saying that the primary contents of the collective unconscious are the archetypes. So, like,
The old
the
man, the wise
concept,
man,
yeah, the
the one
mother, the father, the shadow.
the one that I did find interesting is that this concept of anima and animus, in the sense
Yeah.
of anima being the female aspect in a male, and then the animus, the male aspect in a woman. I think.
It's almost like gender is a construct or something. It's weird. It's almost like we just make these things up to try to understand the existence that we can't ultimately comprehend. It's weird. And it's weird that when like laws are passed about that, it's odd. I just don't understand it. Yeah, I think that if you look at older mystic texts and stuff like that, you'll see that in many cases, like especially with things like the Golden Dawn and other esoteric traditions, a lot of it is about balancing the divine masculine and divine feminine aspects of ourselves. And I think that saying like anima or animus is just another way of saying the divine masculine or the divine feminine, because it transcends the concept of what gender you actually are sitting in. You know what I mean? Like what gender or what sex your body is in. And it kind of brings it to a higher place of we have both of these things in us. And like, cause how can you say to me, right, that like I was brought up in a single parent household for several years, and my mom was very much a dad to me during that time period as well. You can't say that that's like not a valid experience just because my dad died when I was 11. It makes sense. So, I
Well,
mean, that's a very
I
simplified version of it, but
well, yeah, I think from a very Western perspective, this idea that you can't sit in the feminine perspective in a male body, or vice versa, and so there's something that feels foreign in that concept. I think for a lot of Westerners, but I think for a lot of people, who are into mysticism, they're well aware that the energy depends on how the energy is with somebody else, right? Like when you're with somebody, you sort of vibrate with them, and it's like, oh, this feels right. And I may be more feminine energy, but I'm in a male body, and you may be more male energy, and you are in a female body. Can I say that I have like had feelings for lesbians. Like their energy was just so right for me that I was just like, I could see myself in a relationship with you. But that's just my experience.
yeah. I have I been attracted to lesbians before? I don't know if I've been attracted to lesbians before, but I've definitely been attracted to trans men before. And there have been times where I could see myself in relation with someone like that, which is interesting because like generally speaking, I prefer to be the passive partner in like bed, and I don't know how that would work exactly. I would be open to figuring it out, but I mean, I just like the idea of that is very intriguing to me. Let's put it that way. But I definitely I get it because like as I've aged, my understanding of like romance, I guess, or like intimacy has evolved so much. I used to really define myself by my gayness or by
Mm.
my queerness, and I think as I've aged that has really just become like a part of who I am. And I think that there are kind of eras in my life where I've selected like archetypes, if you will, to define myself. And I think for a while, it was like the trendy queer, the very like I'm not nearly butch enough to be Will from Will and Grace, but like very that. You know what I mean? Like the metropolitan gay was my archetype for a really long time. And I felt that recently I've kind of stepped back from that. Not that I'm not gay, obviously. Like hello, hello.
But and you're a fan, right?
Oh
Like
yeah. This homosexual. But there is like I think now I've stepped into kind of the era of like the mystic and the witch. And like I mean I've always been the witch, but like really embodying that in a much more daily way.
we're in different stages, I would imagine, in the witch form, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's like the younger version of you that's and then there's like the
She just called me old. Okay. She said, "Remember your youth when you were young and had hair?"
can I say I started going bald in high school, so
Me
try to
too-ish.
imagine in high school just like receding hairline. I'm like not attractive.
Well, you're very handsome now, so
But back then, I did not think so. When I started going bald, I was like, "What is the world doing to me?"
I could see that for you.
I did have a little crisis. So he also talks about the influence on individuals, right? So in the sense of thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and often collectively. So which I find also interesting in the sense of like that we are influenced by various sub feelings, sub thoughts from other people, which that sort of clan like ish or cultish like mentality that sort of influences us. And again, I'm not saying that's what he's saying there. I'm saying that
Yeah.
there seems to be like we have access to this multitude of thoughts and multitudes of feelings and sort of multitudes of behaviors and ways of interacting in the world, depending on the situation and where you're at, which I think is also interesting too.
I think that also Jung kind of relied a lot on working through mediums like imagination and stuff like that. And there's actually like an argument that everything is kind of the not that everything's the unconscious, but like for example, if you were to pretend to be hypnotized, right? And you were fully pretending you weren't actually put under, but you were making up things to say to the hypnotist. Um, like the patient might then say to like the hypnotist or the hypnotherapist or Jung, like, haha, I was lying, I tricked you. This was all like a big ruse. And then Jung might say something like, yeah, but you made it up from somewhere. So that's still the subconscious. Like it still came from the subconscious. So you actually proved it again. Thank you.
I feel like that's throwing shade. I think Carl Jung just threw some shade.
I mean, he could have. I don't know.
No, you really were doing it if you're saying that you really didn't do it.
Well, I mean, think about it, because if you're pretending, right? If you're playing pretend, and I'm just gonna like make up a story that's coming to my head instead of giving over to the process of say like hypnosis or something, then you are pulling this imagination from something. And Jung used symbolism and the imagination as like a method of concisely dialoguing with like images and things like that. I think he was more I'm more into him than I am into Freud.
Well, Freud was all about, mommy issues and various roles of how he's replaying his mommy issues with other women, where there's sort of like the Oedipus and complex, and so it's like,
Oedipus and Alexa, right?
yeah, it's so sexual. Most of his stuff is really, really sexual, especially like his early development stages of sort of like a phallic and anus stage, so like all of these various stages are all very sort of sexual in a sense. And this idea that I'm want to replace my father to be with my mother, right? Or if I was a female, wanting to replace my mother to be with my father, right? In the sense to sort of be fully realized or to feel fully validated. Um yeah, I think I think Freud was using us to work some of his issues.
Yeah, I think that Freud was processing his own issues through his work, which is fine, but I mean,
And he used a lot of cocaine. So that was a lot of stuff that
that is also true. And from what I understand, because I've never done cocaine, it's a wild ride. But it's also like really short, from what I understand.
I don't know either.
Yeah. I was told by my neurologist that it was okay if I smoke weed because I dealt with epilepsy for a large portion of my life. And he was like, you can smoke weed because it'll like mellow you out. He goes, but if you do cocaine, you'll probably die. And I was like, work. So I'll just not do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't
Yeah.
don't do that. So let's see. Manifestations. The collective unconscious experience itself through various symbolic forms. Why can I not say that word?
It's just not meant for your mouth. It's just not.
Symbolic forms. There we go.
We love it.
Yay. So one of the ones symbolic forms is dreams. So the image and themes frequently appears in dreams, often insight into the unconscious. But that's also personal, right? And so your dreams or symbols in your dreams don't necessarily mean that they would translate to my dreams and meanings in me. But then again, right, like there is this sort of collective unconscious that we all sort of tap into. So some of those experiences are connected. I don't know.
Do you know what I wonder about? Have you ever heard what it means when you have dreams about like teeth falling out?
You're getting money.
I vote in my culturally for me, when you dream about someone whose teeth is falling out, it's like pregnancy. Like there's going to be a pregnancy. And I'm not sure why that is, but that's also not the first time I've heard that like folk tale of like, so I think there's an aspect of like dreams where it's partially the collective unconscious and also partially the personal unconscious.
Yeah.
Because like vanilla ice cream, or no, I'm not going to use vanilla ice cream, pistachio ice cream might not mean the same thing to you that it means to me. But there's like a very specific relationship I have with pistachio ice cream.
Yeah.
So my mom, after my dad passed away, my mom and I took a trip to Salem, Massachusetts, and it was the very first place I ever had pistachio ice cream. And we were sitting on a bench in a park by the Hawthorne Hotel.
Aw.
So like for me, pistachio ice cream is one of the things that always takes me back to my mom and that specific location.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I had a dream about pistachio ice creams, I'd be like, menu, please.
Exactly. You're like, I think that was mint chocolate chip. I don't know. I don't know. It's green.
It is good. Can I say the ice cream store that you took me to when I came to visit you was
Yeah.
so good.
It was, and we had you had the goat cheese one, right? I
Yeah.
had the goat cheese one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I had some off of yours.
Oh yeah, you had strawberry, which was really good.
Thing that I was like, oh, can I try that? She was like, you could try anything you want. I was like, it's okay if I try that. You could try anything you want.
Yeah, she kept like wanting us to try more. I don't know if she was just like intrigued and wanted to talk to us, but she was very nice, very helpful.
She was. She was. So the other part of this of symbol.
Symbolism, symbology.
Thank you. Myths and fairy tales. So the narratives often embody universal archetypes, reflecting common human experience and struggles. And I think we talked a little bit about that. And I think off screen, I mentioned Star Wars, right? Like that's very much fairy tale archetype kind of mixture in there.
Yeah, and I think anytime you tell a story, you're kind of all of them follow the hero's journey in some capacity. There's like the part at the bottom, there's the part where they receive the problem, and then it's like it's a very typical framework. And
Yeah.
there's even like methods of psychology around that, and like there's areas of marketing around that, and like all that stuff. So like that alone kind of and that steps into his beliefs around like individuation and stuff like that and making yourself like the hero of your own tale. But fun fact, if you're ever in a position where you're like leading other people or like trying to sell something to somebody, you're never ever the protagonist. You're always the guide. Otherwise, people are going to be like, "Oh, he's over there being a protagonist. There's no room for me to be a protagonist." But that's a whole nother conversation, I guess.
One thing I'm also noticing is that it's about narrative, right? It's about perspective, right? I feel like regardless if it's the dream or the myths of fairy tales that you're telling, it feels like you're still telling a story or sharing an experience, and that's very narrative form, which I find very interesting because in good therapy, right, when you're working with a client, you want to help them change the story that they're telling about themselves, how they interact with the world, which sort of stands out to me as I'm sort of looking at some of these manifestations.
Well, I think that's also like we can only participate in this world because we can cognize the fact that we are participating in this world. So, like, truly, there's no, how ironic. I was like, truly, there's no true experience. Like, it's all in how we perceive the world around us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, this is such a trite cliche example, but like, is the glass of water half full or is it half empty? It's literally, it's the same. It's all in how you perceive it.
Right.
I I think that I do a really good job at perceiving the world as like magical and always working for me and always working in my favor. And I mean, I could have been super miserable when I found out that I had when I was 25 and I was diagnosed with AIDS before like I became undetectable and stuff like that. I could have let that really wreck me. But I think I've said this before on like on this show that like when I found out, my mom was like, "So what do you think about this?" And I was like, "Well, maybe if I didn't go through this, I wouldn't be able to help someone that I was meant to help." Which her response was like, "Only you." But like I could have been like miserable in that moment and stepped into like, oh, poor me. Or I could have like shifted the narrative and been like, this is going to help me help someone one day. It's
Yeah.
all like how we choose to participate with the world around us.
Right. And I think it's sort of restructuring yourself cognitively to be able to I guess accept the reality or the new reality that you're in because there's always these perceptions that we have of or how we, tell our stories like, oh, I'm gonna be X, Y, and Z, or this is how I think my life is gonna turn out, or I'm gonna get married, I'm gonna have kids, I'm gonna have, white picket fence. So there's this narrative that we tell ourselves, and when something happens, a death, a tragedy, or something completely off script, it shocks us. And I think sometimes that shock immobilizes us or emotionally paralyzes us. And so to be able to say, you know what, that story that I thought I had no longer serves me. Now I have to reimagine my new situation, which I think is very.
Jungian.
I was trying to find the word. Which,
Well, I also think something that Jung brought to the table, which many people didn't, and I don't know if it would be considered like controversial today, but I imagine that at the time it was, is like the concept of shadow work, right? Like the idea of like recognizing and integrating the shadow aspects of ourselves or the parts of ourselves that we would rather repress or deny. I think the move through those things is very much like what we're talking about in a way.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
Well, yeah, because again, I think it's interesting because I realize, and we talked about this offline, I realize I'm a very pessimistic individual.
I wasn't gonna out you, Eshin, but you did it yourself, so it's okay.
Hey, I got a fan too. I can't make that fancy noise, but I got.
It's still wonderful. We still love your fan.
So I'm realizing that part of this idea about living and idea about being in community is that you have to take it all in. You can't just be like, I want to be happy, I want joy, I want crystals, I want glitter all the time. And it's like, well, sometimes you're gonna have to go to the bathroom and take all that off so you could take a shit, right? Like sometimes, like you gotta go through the muck to be able to get to the other side. And I don't feel like our culture does that. I don't feel like our culture really talks about this idea about like life is really difficult. And I know that you and I have talked about this, and we sort of talked about this in our segments for distress and tolerance. But
Which, if you haven't, go check them out.
the idea, it's like the space that you're in, the space or the perspective or the stance that you're in really makes a difference on how you look at your life outward.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that like experiencing negative emotions isn't valid or anything like that because that's totally part of living life. But I think that we can either get stuck in the negative emotion and we can get stuck in the feeling of like these frustrations and stuff like that, or we can go like, okay, work. That's not my preferred outcome, but I can work with it instead of like getting stuck in it.
I was having a moment, a couple of nights ago, and I really was like, oh, wow, I'm in a really dark headspace, and there was a part of me that was like, oh, it's so beautiful though, isn't it?
My little voice popped into your head.
How beautiful is the darkness, isn't it? Isn't it gorgeous? Let's hug it. Let's hug it.
That is very shadow work. But I think also like I mean, people talk about enlightenment, right? And stuff
Mhm.
like that. But I almost would debate that and call it like endarkenment in a way because
Yeah.
like if you've ever closed your eyes and had a really profound meditation, I mean, you can experience like aspects of light, but it's mostly dark. You know what I mean? And I've
Yeah.
had non-dualistic experiences where you become like one with all things, and it's not like you don't get a burst of light necessarily, but you
Mhm.
get like this really profound darkness. So like
Yeah.
but I think like there's a lot of Western culture bullshit around like dark and light, and I think it's really based in racism, which is like disgusting.
And
But
religion.
oh yeah, well that's also based in like racism and patriarchy and controlling people. So
And so speaking of, there's the art and religion. So there's the symbolic experience, and the art, religion, belief can be seen as manifests of underlining archetypes, patterns, shapes across cultures. Oof, that's a mouthful.
and not in the Saturday Night way.
The thing I find interesting is that they like he connects art and religion together.
Well, I mean, like as I said earlier, religion or spirituality or whatever, and I don't know if I said this offline or online, but like I think religion and spirituality is very much like a social science. It's the brain trying to understand something ultimately unknowable, and I think that like that's what art attempts at too. Like it attempts to express things that people are feeling and can't explain or sometimes feeling and can explain, but want to express it in a way that maybe is therapeutic for them or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think that there's definitely a tie between the two.
It's just interesting that the two of them are together, though.
Also, think about this, right? Religion back in the day, back in like 1 BC or whatever, British Columbia. No, I'm just kidding. It's an address. But imagine, right? Like way back then, not everyone could read. Like, not everyone was able to read.
Yeah.
So, like, one of the ways that they would communicate to
Mhm.
people who were not educated was through art. So like the Stations of the Cross in a church in the stained glass and stuff like that. Like the Ten Commandments being on those like marble slabs on the wall, like so that people could understand what was being asked of them.
Yeah.
So I think in many ways you really can't separate art from religion. I mean, you can because they're not the same thing, but like you can't separate the narrative around them because art was used in so many ways to communicate religion and communicate faith and spirituality and stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
think about in ancient Greece when they would build like statues to different deities and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's the symbolic symbol this
Symbolic.
I'm gonna get it one of these days. Symbolic experience in art and the religious belief can be seen as manifest of underlying archetype.
And do you know what? I think if we maybe approached religion with the same questions that we approach art with, we might have a different understanding of how the world works today. So, like for example, you go into a museum, right? And you're like, what do you think they were thinking when they painted this? Or like, what do you think they were feeling when they made this? But if you go into a church, or at least a Roman Catholic one, and you don't get to ask, like, what do you think Mark was talking about when he wrote this? Like, you just kind of have to go, like, that's the thing. Okay, not
Yeah,
subject for interpretation. Cool.
yeah.
Like, I think that if we maybe approach things a little bit more open, that maybe things would be a little bit more open.
And then there's also again, more so in
By
the
the way, rip the Pope. He died recently.
yeah, I did hear that. There's something also too that's very sort of performative if you've ever been to a Catholic Sunday service.
You mean like the dresses and hats? I mean the albs and the vestments. I'm sorry.
Yes,
Whatever.
yes, those.
Their church drag?
It's very performative. Again, I get the part of it that it's ritual, and I think trying to collectively collect the energy to focus the energy, which is what ritual is. But again, it's very very performative. I feel sometimes.
Well, the thing that is interesting to me about that is that we are talking about like ritual worship and stuff like that, but at no point, at least not in my growing up with my Catholic priest uncle and going to Sunday school and stuff like that, it was never explained to me that this is a ritual and we're like attempting to focus our energy to like give that to whatever the divine, like that was never gone through with me. And so I didn't understand the concept of what was happening except some like man handing out stale crackers midday. And I was just not feeling it. And then eventually when I like, took my own study on like spirituality and religion, I was like, "Oh, they stole all of this from like other practices that were like indigenous and shamanic and all that stuff." And I'm like, well, isn't that just a kick in the head? As Frank Sinatra once said.
Well, because I feel like
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get super inflammatory about religion, but
it's very sterilized, right? In the sense
it
of
is.
how and it's very restricted because only males have access to this very sort of ritualized way of providing symbol for religion, and only males, usually white males, have access to that power, which again, which I find very fascinating.
So when you say only white males have access to that power, do you mean like in the Catholic structure or do you mean like as the Pope or how do you mean that? Because a lot of the priests that I know, like through my uncle, I can think of at least, well, I've met so many priests over the years, but I can think of a good chunk like off the top of my head that are people of color, whether they're from like Nicaragua, Colombia, Belize, like anywhere, like anywhere. I've met like priests from all over the world.
But yeah, I guess in the sense of how it all sort of started, right? Because that power, that structure was very limited, and trying to convert individuals into this way of performing or connecting to the divine that's very sort of removed and sanitized comes from a very sort of Western white European centric sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, Jesus was never white. Yeshua was not white.
And so all of those images are white, right? And so like I don't think I've met anyone who was specifically a Catholic priest that was not white.
Hmm.
That was
Well,
white.
next time.
Yeah, that was white. Yeah, that was white. Yeah, all of them.
I mean, next time, if you feel like hanging out with priests next time, you want to come down to New Jersey, I will. I'll introduce you to several brown priests. Some
hanging
of them are actually kind of hot.
hanging out in the castle with some priests.
Oh no, they're not invited to the castle. I doubt they're going to come to an event called the Witches Ball. You know what I mean? Actually, do you want to hear a really funny story? So I've been on like several podcasts lately talking about like what I do and stuff like that. And I do mention this podcast usually when I'm on there. I'm like, I have another podcast called All Wise Transformations. You can find it on YouTube. But when we talk about, I was talking to this one gentleman who, by the way, I don't think that people should ever apologize for any disabilities they have or anything like that. But I do think part of being a responsible host is like allowing your guests to know if you're working with a disability that might be surprising or jarring, just so that the guest isn't caught off guard and looking silly on camera. And two things happened with this one podcast episode, which did not make it to air. One, this person was deaf, or like mostly deaf, hard of hearing, and did not tell me that in advance. And so initially, when I was listening to their questions and stuff like that, I had a really hard time understanding them because they weren't as articulate as, say, like you or I, because of for obvious reasons. And like I totally understand that. And it would have been nice to go into it with like a little bit of a like, okay, I have to prepare to listen in this way. I have to like, that wasn't even the worst part of it. So then we get through maybe like 15 minutes of conversation, and he just like cuts the interview. And I was like, okay, that was quick, but maybe it's like, maybe he does like just little burst podcasts or something. I don't know. Because there are some podcasts out there that are like just these little snippets. And he was like, he wrote me like the next day, like, oh, I'm not going to use this interview because the majority of my audience is like Christian or Catholic. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, well, I don't know why you chose to have a witch on your show then, especially since I gave you my, like, when people book me for a podcast, I send them a press packet about myself. And I'm like, I don't know why did you not read it? Can you also not read? I don't know. So, but I was, I didn't, I didn't care so much, but I just thought it was so weird why he would have even engaged in the conversation, but whatever. We're in like a Facebook group together, and sometimes I'll see him post for like more guests, and I'm like, you might want to note that.
Yes, that happened, folks. That you heard it here first at All Wise Transformation.
I'm sorry, was that like too much? Was that like overly offensive? I really don't know. I've lost track of that type of stuff.
At this point, I accept it all. I accept it all.
I mean, if people are listening this far in and they're still tuning in for the episodes that I'm here, like they know what to expect now. I'm sorry. Sorry, not sorry.
Done. Yes. How do you say the last one, Juno? I can't even pronounce the last one on here. The last little side bulletin under art and religion. How do you say that?
Synchronicity.
That's
Yeah.
another. I can't say.
Yes, Jung links it to the collective unconscious and to the phenomenon of synchronicity, which he used to describe as like meaningful coincidences. So, you know, when you see like 1111 and you're like, oh, angel numbers, or you're like, say you have a personal number that means something to you, like 317 or like 419 or whatever, like that would be like considered synchronistic. And that is another way actually that it ties into tarot, because a lot of tarot readers lean on the concepts of synchronicity to explain like card pulls or why things feel very relevant in a reading and that type of thing. And I think it's like our inner world justifying our outer experience. And you
Right.
can even like tie that to things like the I Ching and stuff like that, which I think Young might have done research on that.
Well, I think he did a lot of pulling from various sort of Zen sort of what is it?
Modalities?
Yeah, thank you. Pulling from different modalities to create his sort of a theoretical stance. Is synchronicity also like, so I've had experiences in my life where I've met people, one person, and then at one particular event in one area time in my life, and then that person met somebody else that I've known in another time in my life, and they've gotten together, and I'm like,
Oh,
what's going on here? And so would that be considered synchronicity?
I think that would definitely be synchronistic. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is very very weird in the sense of there's a pattern to life, but yet there isn't. right? Like it's chaotic, but yet it's ordered. So it's
Well,
a
I
very
think part of it, like, I think the whole world is chaos, really, but the brain longs to kind of like organize things. And that's why, like, and this is like kind of tied into the collective unconscious, where like you kind of like the brain constantly wants to order things. And so if you say, like, I never have trouble finding parking, right? Your brain will look for patterns where that command makes sense. And like you can even reference like neurolinguistic programming when you talk about that and think about the fact that, for example, don't think of a pink elephant. What did you just do?
pink elephant.
Yeah, because the brain doesn't understand negative commands. It has to flip it. So like linguistic programming and patterns, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
So like in order to understand the world around us and like like your brain will look for things in order to like understand what you're saying type thing. It's gonna look for a continued series of patterns.
So in wrapping up, right, I think Carl Jung sort of believed in the underlining collective unconscious. Its archetypes can lead to greater self-awareness, which I like that part in the sense of like I can learn more about myself if I'm aware of how sort of synchronicity shows up, how art sort of shows up, how various dreams manifest, and how I'm listening and digesting storytelling or fairy tales, or how I'm sharing my narrative, which is a very sort of like very again very woo woo mystic way of approaching therapy, which I think I like.
Yeah, I think it was also, even though we look back in time and kind of assume that like, oh, they weren't nearly as evolved as us or like whatever. There's this, I feel like, especially in the first world, there's this like air of arrogance around the present versus the past, and almost like if things happened in the past, they were instantly backwards. But I think that also when you travel backwards or like you're in the past, it's also kind of closer to source or like closer to when things started.
Yeah.
So it actually might be less diluted if you think about it. And if we're functioning within the Jungian framework, it actually explains horoscopes as well because they're just archetypes. Like Cancer is an archetype, Capricorn is an archetype,
Mm,
Scorpio is an archetype. So
yeah.
that's also like a way to work with it.
Which I feel like it's like parts work, right? Like I'm working on various parts of myself because there's a part of myself that is the hero. There is a part of myself that doesn't necessarily fall under Capricorn, even though like that's my sign. So yeah, it's being very aware of the various parts that you portray or have or tell about yourself or share with the folks around you.
Yeah.
Well, folks, if you've gotten this far, please give a thumbs up.
Oh no, 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 no. If you've gotten this far, put the word Carl Jung in the comments because then we'll know that you got to the all the way end pretty much.
Yes, please, please put the word
Or
call
archetypes.
on archetypes.
Yeah.
Archetypes or call young. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thanks for having this conversation with me.
Yeah, I love talking to you, Eshin, you know that. You
Yay!
like scratch parts of my brain and I love it.
I love a good scratch.
Yes.
All right, folks, we will see you same time, same channel.
Yeah. Remember to use your voice, be a productive force in society, and be kind to someone who maybe doesn't deserve it today.
All right, folks. You heard it. You heard it here.
Bye.